by now the moon should be totally out of sight. And if we back up a little bit, if the farther back in time we keep going, the moon would have been closer and closer and closer to the earth. And at some point it would have been too close for the moon and the earth to exist in the same space. We have a shrinking sun. We know this. The shrink rate is about 1% every 1,000 years. So 100,000 years ago, the sun would have been double its size and would not have sustained life on the earth. And yet they say the early man showed up about 14 to 15 million years ago. Now, you say, well, what about fossils? I was told in school that fossils, formed as a result of something laying on the ground and millions and millions of years compacting it and pressing it and turning it into rock. Again, evolution requires millions of years. But what if things could be fossilized in a short amount of time? In 1973, a high-voltage power line fell near Grand Prairie, Alberta, Canada. It instantly fossilized tree roots where it touched the ground. Instantly turned them into stone. Not convinced? Take a look at this picture. An iron mallet on a wooden handle embedded into probably what at one time was mud, and now is fossilized stone. And they say that early man didn't have the technology, the capability to make tools like this, that tools like this, especially iron forged tools, are only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Something doesn't add up, people. Something doesn't add up. Now, we're going to talk about dinosaurs. And I believe that dinosaurs walked with man. Now, evolution says that's impossible. But I believe that God created, in fact, let me read Genesis chapter 1 again. Let's read what happened on day 6 of creation. In day 6, Genesis chapter 1, verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. So we see here that it was on the 6th day that God created both man and all of the earth animals on the exact same day. So according to the Bible then, I should believe that man and earth-walking animals such as dinosaurs, elephants, lions, and kitty cats were all created on the same day, therefore existed on the same day. Now some people have said, well, I have a problem with that because the Bible doesn't use the word dinosaur. How come the Bible doesn't use the word dinosaur? Well, this Bible that I have is a King James Version Bible. It was translated in 1611. The word dinosaur was not coined until the mid-1800s. But does the Bible mention these large, gigantic creatures that at one time roamed the earth? I think it does. And I'm going to show you some places in the Bible. First of all, we have a creature that the Bible identifies as behemoth. Now, we use the word behemoth to mean something that is great, big, gigantic, huge, large. We don't call something like a pencil. This is not behemoth. Okay? Behemoth is massive, it's huge. And notice what God said in Job chapter 40, verse 15. Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Now I want to stop right here. Notice that God is reminding Job that he created behemoth and man on the same day. He said, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Now, there are other descriptions in Job chapter 40, which you should read, that describe behemoth. Did you know one of the descriptions of behemoth is that he moveth his tail like a cedar? Now, some Bible scholars, some liberal Bible scholars, want to put in there that behemoth is an elephant or hippopotamus. Now, the problem with that is that an elephant or hippopotamus has a tail that's about that long. Maybe it moves its tail like a weed, but definitely not like a cedar. God was describing something that could pick up an entire river, that ate grass like an ox, which is not an elephant, and it had a tail that was as massive as a cedar tree. It looks like that God was describing, and Job saw behemoth. He knew what behemoth was because he knew that God created this thing and that it was large, and it could very well be something that we would call like a brontosaur, one of the largest land creatures that ever walked the face of the earth. I mean, we've seen the skeletons of these things, and they're real. And these things were ginormous. They were behemoth. They were very, very huge. And God said, I created this thing, and I have power over this thing. Now, if God can create a dinosaur, is God afraid of a dinosaur? No. God said the biggest thing that you've ever seen walking on the earth, the behemoth, a brontosaurus, God said, I made it. I have that much power. He also describes in the next chapter a creature he calls Leviathan. And he said, canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord, which thou lettest down? Leviathan was this large, massive sea dinosaur. Go read Job 41, because you'll see that Leviathan was so fierce and so strong that no one ever wanted to tangle with it. That Leviathan, listen to this, Leviathan had scales. Go read Job 41, because the Bible says that Leviathan, when he swam underneath the water, that the heat that was coming out of his nostrils, he was a fire breather. The heat coming out of his nostrils was so intense that it was boiling the water as he moved through. The Bible says that it looked like frost coming up out of the water. The bubbles from, you could always tell where Leviathan was because a trail of bubbles was following him around. And it's interesting that the Bible calls Leviathan, look at what it calls it. Isaiah chapter 27 verse 1. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent. Now stop right here. We know that Leviathan then is related to the reptile family of creatures. God calls it a serpent. And it's the reptiles that the dinosaurs were the same family. So we're talking about a reptile sort of creature. And that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay, here it is, the dragon that is in the sea. Now this to me is interesting. Here we are, we're talking about, does the Bible mention large, gigantic, reptilian creatures that are fierce and that live on the land and live in the sea? Yes, the Bible's mentioning these creatures. And he calls them dragons. Now I want you to stop here for a minute and I want you to think about it. People say that dragons are just a myth. They're just a figment of man's imagination. How is it that all of the civilizations, all over the world, invented the exact same creature at the same time? Because we know that the Europeans have dragon stories. We know that the Japanese have dragon stories. The Chinese have dragon stories. We know that the Sumerians had dragon stories. We know that the Mayans and the Incas and the Aztecs, they all had dragon stories. They all told stories. In fact, every civilization in the earth tells the same story about men and these creatures that the Bible calls Leviathan. It calls them reptiles, calls them dragons, that men and dragons existed together. There are even stories that men killed some of these dragons. Are they myth? Or are they the remnant stories of days gone by when people knew about these giant reptilian creatures that we now call dinosaurs, but back then they called them leviathans and behemoths and dragons? Every civilization in the world has a dragon story. Now, some people would also look in the Bible and say, well, the dragon is a myth. It's just a mythological creature that the Bible uses to illustrate this fierce devil creature that a lot of people don't believe in as well, but I do. Let's look at the Bible. Let's go back to how the Bible mentions this flying, fiery serpent. You know how they say that the dragons fly through the air and they can swim the water and they fly through the air and they have fire coming out of their mouth? Look at how the Bible describes this very same thing. Isaiah 30 verse 6. The burden of the beasts of the south into the